Read it.
I already know what it says.
The glass door groaned when I pushed it open, and the board was already at work. A ledger lay face up at the head of the table, pages clipped with a red tab, and someone had already turned it to our section. Betrayal hit me before I could speak. The roster listed my division for termination, Ethan, someone said without looking up. I stepped forward and the room seemed to close around the ledger. I pulled the nearest chair and saw names in a grid. Project codes, team counts, severance rows. My division's code sat there in black print. I folded and refolded the page with my fingertip. My hands smelled of coffee and printer toner. The problem was concrete. The company was cutting people, and my team, my colleagues, and Claire's name were on that sheet. I should have left. I did not. I stayed and listened while Damien outlined metrics like a surgeon naming organs. He spoke in numbers and targets. He did not say people, we scale now or we lose market position. Damien. His voice clipped the room. It did not ask for consent. I felt doubt first, then anger that edged into a quiet resolve. Doubt shifted to fear when I realized who the cuts touched. When the meeting broke, I found Maya in the corridor and pulled her into the hallway. She let the door click closed behind us. The fluorescent light hummed. Maya, this is our team, I said. Why are we listed? Maya looked at the ledger I shoved across her palms. She kept her face steady. Ethan, the board approved the framework. We have to implement the timeline in 48 hours. 48 hours. I touched the worn leather watch at my wrist. You can be serious, my voice sharpened. Maya folded her arms. She always folded her arms when she needed me to hear facts before feelings. We can delay, I can lobby, but Damien wants decisive action. He needs a name who will run it. So he gives me the pen. I said yes. I stepped onto the open, plan floor and watched a security escort take a box from Maressel's hands. Betrayal tightened my jaw as the guard guided her past the rows of half-cleared desks. The roster was pinned to the board by the reception desk, and there was no question left. My division was listed for cuts. A manager from another team said my name without looking at me. Ethan, they put your section on the list. I heard the words as if they were coming from a long way off and walked straight to the board. The roster had the same font the ledger had when someone left it open at the head of the table the week before. I remember that ledger, someone had flipped it to our pages and left it face up. Now the roster had our names. I could feel the tile under my shoes, the hum of the ventilation, the coffee cup in my hand cooling. The problem was immediate. I was now the person assigned to deliver the news and to carry the reasons Damien had chosen. Anger came first. I went cold and planted both hands on the board as if it would stop the room from tilting. Then doubt arrived a second later. If I resisted, the memo said, the division risked complete dissolution. Ethan, Damien wants you in his office. Someone called. Maya's name trailed in my head and pulled me toward the corner glass tower. I pushed the elevator button with a thumb that trembled. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and waxed stone. The security desk logged Marisel's departure. My phone buzzed with messages from team members I hadn't yet faced. The elevator opened into Damien's corner office. He was already standing with his back to the windows, hands folded. He did not look surprised when I entered, closed the door. Damien. His voice was measured in the way that made the air feel thinner. I closed the door. The city spread below us through floor to ceiling glass, bright and indifferent. Damien folded his hands and slid a slim file across the desk toward me. This is strategic, he said. I read the language while he watched. The file was precise, numbers, timelines, legal phrasing. Maya stood just inside the doorway, hands at her sides, expression flat. We need cuts. Ethan, we need to move fast and we need you to execute it. Damien. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I said, you want me to tell people, my people, that they have to leave? My voice narrowed. You want me to be the one they blame? Damien did not look away. People make hard choices. We protect the business. You do this cleanly and we preserve what matters for the rest. Maya crossed her arms and said, Ethan, legally we have the severance packages worked out. We have scripts for calls. We'll support you through each conversation. The meeting shifted from accusation to procedure in a single breath. That shift cut me. I had been a manager. I had not expected to be handed the hammer. We moved to the glassed conference room outside. Maya spread the severance terms on the table. Weeks of pay, outplacement services, non-disparagement clauses. Her pen tapped the folder in a rhythm that matched the clock above the door. Read the language now, she said. Say the lines. Stick to the script. I read the script aloud once, then again, clumsy where empathy should have been. A legal paragraph required me to explain performance-based reductions, another cited strategic redundancy. Each phrase felt like a small fracture inside me. Maya stopped me when I began to add explanation. Don't add more. She said, if you explain, you start negotiating realities that don't exist inside this file. I remember the ledger at the head of the table again, the way someone had turned it to our section and let the page sit there. The memory hardened into a question. Had our elimination been unavoidable, or had someone already decided while we still believed in strategy? An hour later, I walked the list. I stood at a workstation where Jonah had the photo of his daughter taped to the monitor. He blinked at me, mouth open, breath shallow. Ethan, he said. I am sorry, I said. I did not know what else to say. He reached for the box on the desk and shoved the photo inside. His fingers were quick and practical and did not meet my eyes. I thought we were building something. Then he left without looking back. At a cluster of desks, a senior who had mentored me pulled me aside and accused me by name. Ethan, you sold us out. Why did you let them do this? His voice was low and broken. I didn't decide this. I replied, I have orders. Orders from whom? He spit the question like it hurt him to say the name. I did not answer. I could feel anger give way into a steadier, more dangerous emotion, resolve. I would not be the man who only carried orders without testing them. After lunch, Maya pulled me into the rear stairwell and closed the heavy door. She slid a memo across the concrete step. Read this, she said. The memo had numbers rerouted, acquisition funds, executive bonuses, and small line items marked integration expense. It showed transfers out of operating budgets into a series of projects and board-approved payouts that had not been disclosed to lower management. My hands tightened on the paper. The memo contained a name and a ledger code that matched the entries I'd seen in the open ledger from the boardroom the previous week. They could have spared these positions if the funds hadn't been shifted. Maya, someone decided priorities. I stood in that stairwell with the city noise above and felt the room change from a problem of survival to a problem of intent. Betrayal deepened into something personal. Who authorized this? I asked. Maya looked at me, and for the first time she allowed a quiet edge into her voice. Damien knew, the board knew, the transfers are dated last quarter. We were two people who had to decide what to do with dangerous information. Maya pushed her glasses up and said, if you go public with this, the division could be dissolved entirely. If you execute the cuts, those funds stay with the acquisitions and the executives. It's not a choice without cost. A silence settled. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I imagined Claire's face when I told her. I pictured my son's toothbrush on the sink and the worn leather watch on my wrist. We built parts of this company from the ground up, I said. You know that, Maya? I do, she said, and that's why you were chosen. They're betting that your loyalty will keep things together. My loyalty felt used. I remembered Jonah handing me his finished box and Marisol's eyes as she passed me in the corridor. The stairwell smell, clean concrete and heated air, grounded the decision in the physical again. By mid-afternoon I had a list of names in my pocket and a script on my tablet. The hallway outside team Rose hummed with low conversation. I practiced the lines once, swallowing the urge to explain the transfers out loud. The first meeting was short. I told Anita she would receive her severance details, and that her would guide her through next steps. Anita put down her mug and said, "You'll be all right, Ethan. You'll find a way." Her voice was steady, too steady. 2 desks down, a developer named Carlos me point blank, "Did you know about this?" "No," I said, "not before today." I felt the lie sharpen in my mouth. It wasn't a direct falsehood, but it was an omission. Carlos stood and stepped toward me. "Ethan, tell me the truth. If you did, say it. If you didn't, tell me what you will do." His hand curled around a photo of his graduation. I said, "I'll try to get answers." That was the only promise I could keep at the time. The list emptied like a tide. People picked up boxes, hugged in doorways, left messages on desks. Every closed cubicle felt like a small, real loss. I walked past a whiteboard where our sprint goals were still written. Q3 deliverable, integration test, user flow. A name and a deadline underlined in a sloppy marker. By 2 in the afternoon, I returned to Damien's office with the memo folded in my breast pocket. I placed it on his desk without preamble. "You reallocated operating funds into acquisitions and bonuses," I said. Damien looked at the file, then at me. "We made calls to secure the company's future. Growth isn't free, Ethan. Preparation isn't pretty. You redirected funds that could have preserved jobs," I said. "You knew this could be avoided." He steepled his fingers. Maya stood at the window, arms folded, watching the street. "You are asking me to choose between a public fight that risks everything and quiet compliance that hurts people now," I said. "Tell me the truth. Is this strategy or convenience?" Damien leaned forward. "This is leadership. Sacrifices are unpleasant. You are asking the wrong question. Ask instead how we limit collateral damage." The words were cold calculus. I felt anger flare and then a different current, guilt at being the instrument of pain, and then a sticky, heavy responsibility. That was the second emotion shift. Anger moved into guilt and then into a hard, practical resolve. Who authorized the transfers? I pressed. Damien named departments and dates without admitting his hand. He spoke of shareholders, market windows, and leverage. He tilted his head in those small motions that always measured effect. "So you asked me to deliver the cuts because you wanted plausible deniability," I said. He paused exactly 2 beats. "You know what you must do, Ethan. Protect the division you can. Be surgical." He reached for a pen and signed off on a stack of forms. That pause was a small cliffhanger I felt in my chest. Maya watched me with an expression that said she both feared me and believed I could choose differently. Back on the floor, the atmosphere had changed again. People avoided eye contact, or they stared hard enough to accuse. Rumors threaded through the cubicles. Layoffs, acquisitions, bonuses. I told myself to finish the list and to talk to Claire. I found Claire waiting in the lobby after I left the office an hour later. She held our son's new crayon drawing, a house with too many windows and a crooked sun in the corner. "You look like someone who fought in a storm," she said without beating around the subject. "I had to tell people today," I said. "They gave me the list." Claire folded the drawing into quarters and placed it on the bench between us. "Ethan, this doesn't feel right," she said. "You know that, right?" "Yes," I said, "I know." She searched my face and avoided looking at my wedding band. "Did they tell you why? Did Damien say why these specific teams?" I told her about the memo. I told her I had seen the transfers. I told her I had confronted Damien. Claire's fingers tightened on the drawing, so they protected the growth at our expense while telling us it's unavoidable. Maya called it political expedience, I said. Claire exhaled slowly. "Your father used to say that when companies talk about strategic realignment, it's code for keeping the people with the best ties." "My father said that too," I said. I held the bench edge until my knuckles whitened. She looked at me, then away. "What will you do?" she asked. I wanted to say something grand, that I would resign, that I would expose the transfers, that I would save them all. Instead, I looked at the building doors and into the evening light. My stomach tightened with a practical thought. If I resisted publicly, the division might be dissolved and our mortgage payment would go unpaid. Claire folded her hands in her lap, an old gesture of hers when she gathered strength. "Whatever you choose," she said, "remember Jono and Anita and Carlos. They packed boxes today, they have families." Her words were not a demand. They were a demand that I understand the human ledger I had to balance. I left her there holding the crayon house and walked home. At the kitchen table that night, I pushed the resignation packet to one side and laid the worn watch and the crayon picture on the table. The watch leather smelled like old coffee. The drawing's crayon stuck to my finger when I traced the sun. I opened the memo again and read the dates. I imagined a line on a page where someone had written a different set of priorities and then signed it. My hands trembled, but this time the movement had a purpose. The emotion shifted once more, resolve hardened into a plan. I would not be the silent messenger again. I had seen the ledger left open at the boardroom table. I had the memo. I had Maya's eyes when she handed it to me. Those were concrete facts that would make a statement. But before any statement, there were smaller choices. I filled out one more form. A draft resignation that I did not sign, a set of questions for the board that I drafted and saved, and a list of names I would try to protect through redeployment or discreet recommendations. Claire came to the sink and watched me fold the drawing in the same way she had. She placed a coffee mug beside the watch, then reached for my hand. "You have to choose the one you can live with, Ethan," she said. "Not the one that sounds noble." Her words landed like a light pressure on my cheek. I nodded, and then I told her what I had already decided to do first. Approach her with a proposal to reassign 2 critical engineers to another project line and to ask for a pause on 1 layoff pending review. She looked at me carefully. "Do it now," she said. I opened the email and typed. My hands were steady. The clock on the microwave ticked in even beats. Outside the window, a delivery truck backed into a bay with a squeal. When I hit send, I felt a small, real thing shift. An action taken, a risk assumed. The memo still existed. Damien still had his calm answers. The roster was pinned in reception. But I had acted to keep some people in place. The chapter did not end with justice achieved, only with choices made and consequences set into motion. The resignation packet sat unsigned. The worn watch lay beside Claire's drawing on the table. The next morning I would face Damien again, and the board's ledger would be waiting. I turned off the kitchen light and left the drawing under the lamp. The page caught the rimlight. The child's son looked too determined to be ordinary. I put my thumb over the corner and felt the crayon ridges. The drawer closed with a small click. Outside, a night cleaner wound a cart down the hallway of our building. Inside the flat, my son's breathing was regular upstairs. I lay awake feeling the decision bloom into consequences. I knew what I could risk and what I could protect. I rose, walked back to the table, and moved the resignation packet into the top drawer beside the watch and the drawing. Then I turned off the lamp. The final sound of the chapter is concrete, the drawer closing on an unsigned form. I found an unmarked envelope taped to my car with our division circled. I peeled it off with my thumb and read the printed roster. Betrayal sat in my mouth the way metal tastes after a filling, and suspicion pushed me toward the stairwell before I finished the list. The roster named people I had scheduled for one-on-ones next week. My division was circled in red. My hands tightened on the paper. That suspicion, fevered, precise, pulled at every decision I would make that night. I folded the sheet and shoved it into the inner pocket of my coat as Maya rounded the corner carrying a slim tablet and a thermos. "You saw this, Maya." Her voice kept its steady cadence, but she didn't smile. I heard the urgency in how she dropped the thermos onto the car hood. We both knew the garage rules about late-night meetings. We also both knew what a roster meant. "Yes," I said. My division circled. My voice felt small in the concrete bay. I tapped the envelope against my watch out of a habit I could drop. Maya's eyes narrowed. Her mouth closed in that careful line she wears when she pins a problem under cross-examination. Maya put the tablet between us and opened a memo. "Ethan, this isn't just a restructuring. They're re-clearing the books to sell parts off. Look at the shell entities, Rourke Holdings footprint," she pointed. Her finger pressed flat on Damien's name, as if that could stop the print from spreading. The thermos clinked. My pulse found a rhythm in the echo. I remembered the boardroom ledger from a week ago, the one open to our section that had pulled betrayal into the room before any of us could speak. I felt that ledger's weight again, the way the pages had been clipped and already turned to our losses. My jaw tightened. I had tried to call it a mistake then. Now the paper in my hand said otherwise. Maya folded the tablet closed. Security saw a courier earlier asking around for parking assignments, she said. Someone's making this public. Or someone wants us out before the auction. Her hands moved quick and efficient. She folded her arms and waited. I took a breath and felt the shift inside me from suspicion to outrage. I said, they can do this without a plan to soften the exit. Who else knows? My thumb rubbed the rim of my wedding band the way it did when I was thinking through numbers. Claire's face flashed across my mind, her folded hands at the last staff meeting. The way she had watched me with that quiet look that meant we were on uneven ground. Maya glanced at my ring. Ethan, you need to decide if you'll be part of this or stop it. She my name clean and even. My chest tightened. Her tone moved me from outrage into calculation. The anger cooled into gears and levers. I said, call Damien. Tell him I want to see him now. My voice did not waver. I stepped toward the elevator and felt the concrete thud under my shoes. Maya followed. The elevator ride up was the length of 2 canned breaths. The doors opened on the private corridor. The executive suite door stood like a polished tooth in the hallway light. When Damien's assistant let me in, the room smelled of strong coffee and ozone. Damien sat behind the long desk with his hands folded around a fountain pen. He tilted his head when I entered and said, Ethan. Close the door. He did not raise his voice. I shut the door and set the envelope on the desk without comment. Damien's eyes moved to it and then to me. We accelerate the restructuring, he said. You're in charge of implementing it. The words fell like ledger pages flipping. His steel blue eyes measured me. The room hummed with the building's night systems. I kept my face steady. You want me to fire people who trust me. I said, you want me to sign their severance and watch them leave with boxes. My hand went to the leather briefcase at my feet. Claire's voice came back. Not her words, but the way her shoulders had tightened when I'd mentioned tightened budgets. I felt a tilt from anger toward refusal. Damien leaned forward enough that the gold cufflink caught a strip of lamplight. It's not about trust, he said. It's about the company's position. You understand leverage, Ethan. You know how to make cuts cleanly. He paused to let the sentence land. I need someone who can make the people choices without sentiment. The pause was a measurement. He spoke my name slow. You will oversee the cut. The sentence was direct, a command disguised as strategy. For a stretch of seconds I could only hear the vac. My hands felt clumsy. I said, you want me to betray the team? I felt the word betrayal land in my mouth differently this time, sharp, practical. Damien cocked his head and said, we are running a business, Ethan. Stop personalizing the numbers. Or leave them to someone who will. His voice was the cold baritone I had heard in earnings calls. We exchanged 3 quick lines, then a pause for effect, as if the room needed punctuation. Damien, you can hide asset moves behind job cuts, I said. This is a corporate decision, he replied. Then make it without me, I said. His hand closed around the fountain pen. You understand the price of refusal. There's a clean exit on the table. He slid a packet toward me. Terms I could not accept without staining my name. Security waited in the corridor. I heard it as a small human shuffle outside the glass. I left without signing. The corridor light felt too bright when I pushed the door open. Outside, a security guard stopped me with the same professional blank face I'd seen when Marisol had her box taken. I thought of that morning, the open, planned floor and Marisol lifting a small cardboard box while someone from security took it. The memory was a knot of sound. Tape tearing, a voice saying, we have orders, and the cardboard settling into the arms of a stranger. I felt that knot tighten into a promise to act. Back at my corner office, I sat with my hands folded on the desk and opened my laptop. Maya arrived with a dim lamp and a USB drive. She had the copied internal memo and a concealed ledger she had pulled from her archive, a list of shell entities and transfer dates. This ledger shows they re-clearing payroll to balance the sell off, she said. Her voice shook for the first time just at the edge. Her mouth pressed into a line. She slid the drive across the desk. The lamp cast an amber pool over it. I looked at the screen and then at Maya. "How long have you had this?" I asked. The colices at the edge of my thumb rubbed the ring. The way she hesitated moved me from calculation back into fear. Concern for the people whose names were on the list. Long enough, Maya, long enough to know this is personal. Damien's shell entities moved the assets the week after the cuts. She tapped a line on the screen. The cursor blinked next to a date. Her eyes met mine. "If we do nothing, people will leave with severance and these assets will transfer. The staff will be gone and a buyer walks in with clean hands." Her hands were steady again. I felt a second emotional shift. Fear folded into a controlled resolve. I said, "We have to secure proof and warn people quietly." My words were a plan and not a plea. Maya agreed with a short nod. "We copy everything. We prepare a formal resignation. We warn employees at the right moment." She named the steps like a surgeon mapping incisions. She stood up and checked the door. "Security loops change at 2 a.m., she said. "We have a window." The sentence tightened the timeline into a concrete event. We worked in methodical bursts, her fingers on the keyboard, my hand moving papers, the hum of the office lights. Each file we copied felt like weight lifted. Each percentage and transfer note stored on the drive moved the risk from rumor into proof. Once we had the files, I drafted a formal resignation. Signing it felt like cutting a tether. I wrote words I would later read aloud to Claire. "I can no longer execute decisions that cost people their means for opaque gains." I paused over the signature, my pen hovering. The pen's tip trembled, but I pressed down and signed. When I left the office with the drive taped into my jacket, I kept telling myself the shift inside me from obedient manager to someone who refused to be complicit was not a speech. It was a small, precise string of actions. I walked through the building and past the glass boardroom, where a single chair sat empty at the head of the table. It was the same image I'd seen in a sketch earlier this month, an empty chair drawing focus on what power had left behind. At home, Claire met me in the kitchen with a plate and 2 mugs. The house smelled of simmered tomato and a towel left on the counter. Her hands folded in her lap. "Ethan," they named the division. "They put your name on the list." She my full name like a bell. The way she avoided looking at me changed the room's tone from domestic to interrogative. I set the printed roster and the copied memo on the table. Claire sat back and watched the pages as if they were a report about someone else. "You can keep doing this to us. Claire, you promised the kids. You promised me." Her voice broke once and then held steady. I could see her counting measures in her mouth. "Claire, I didn't agree to this," I said. "They me to implement it. I refused to sign their deal." I copied the ledger. My hands were open on the table. Her eyes closed briefly. The shift from accusation to negotiation moved through the kitchen like an audible draft. Claire pushed her chair back with a soft scrape. "Ethan, we can survive a layoff if you walk away with nothing." We signed the mortgage. "The kids need certainty." Her words were inventory, mortgage, grocery, daycare. She looked at the roster and then at me. "Choose the children over the company." The sentence was blunt. It forced me to answer with action, not justification. We argued in small, fast lines. "Claire, I'm trying to stop them," I said. "Stop them how?" She snapped. "By exposing the transfers," I replied, "and ruin us if it goes wrong." She countered. "We will lose everything if we don't try," I said. There were 3 rapid exchanges and then a long pause where the coffee machine clicked in the other room. Claire folded her hands and asked me a question that forced a choice. "Which side are you on, Ethan?" The words kept falling back on the ledger's printed dates. I felt the room narrow to a single fork. I told her the plan, how Mai and I would copy evidence, how I would file, and how I would warn the staff quietly before any mass announcement. Claire listened in measured silence. When I finished, she pressed her thumb into the edge of the printed roster until the paper dented. "Then do it cleanly," she said. "Do it for the team and for us. Don't make it a spectacle." The phrase moved the conflict into execution. Claire's insistence on discretion shifted me toward a quieter form of courage. Not dramatic resistance, but careful, tactical action. The next night, Maya let me into the small Har office with a dim lamp and a stack of personnel files we were not supposed to access after hours. The lamp's filament hummed. The room smelled of toner and shelving polish. She pointed to a ledger tucked behind compliance documents. "This is it," she said. Her hand trembled slightly as she slid the book forward. I ran my fingers over the printed ledger names, transfers, shell entities linked to Damien's accounts. The ledger showed payments routed through companies I had never heard named before. My stomach rolled into a tight, practical knot. I moved from resolve into a streak of cold clarity. Every date matched severance scheduling. I tested the connection with a search on the tablet. The pattern stood like a built case. Maya read aloud a transfer date and then looked up. "The cell off aligns with these layoffs by 2 weeks, every time," she said. "Rourke Holdings pockets the gains, and the company is left with skeleton staff." She paused and breathed. That pause changed the scene from suspicion to undeniable exposure. We worked in pairs, her at the terminal, me copying files to the drive. The rhythm was mechanical, minimal talk, heads bent over screens. The sound of the drive's indicator light became a metronome for action. Every time the copy finished, I felt a small lift of pressure off my chest. Halfway through, the door's lock clicked. A shadow moved across the frosted glass. My hand froze above the keyboard. Maya's shoulder pressed against mine. We both knew the action outside could be a janitor or a security sweep. The lock turned again. My pulse jumped into a mini cliffhanger where minutes stretched and choices tightened. The silence lasted 3 breathless seconds. The door opened and a young Ha representative poked her head in. "Sorry, we left something on the photocopier," she said. Her eyes slid past us to the lamp. She smiled uncertainly and left. The tiny interruption snapped us both into motion. We swallowed and kept copying. The external event, an interrupted door, moved us from a contained operation into immediate risk. With the files secure, I drafted the formal employee warning and a schedule for quiet notices to be delivered the morning after we filed. Maya insisted we prepare a single point of contact for staff questions and a secure channel for whistleblower contacts. Her exactness pushed me from heady righteousness into an operational plan. At midnight, driven by a mix of fear and stubbornness, I walked up to Damien's glass-walled office and pushed the door open without knocking. The skyline lights framed his silhouette. "He was not surprised to see me, Ethan," he said. "You look tired." His tone had the chill of someone pointing out an obvious weather change. I did not waste words. I stepped close enough that the glass reflected our faces. "You sold their security for liquidity," I said. "You traded payroll for transfer fees." My voice was short. He answered with a thin smile. We exchanged rapid lines, 3, then 2, then a pause, each thrown like a set of measurements. "Damien, this is theft disguised as finance," I said. "You dramatize everything." He replied, "It's people's lives." I said, "You chose loyalty to a team over the company's future," he said. The glass caught the light as he stood. "Ethan, I am offering you a clean way out. Take it." He pushed a small envelope across his desk. Security's steps sounded faintly in the corridor. The next lines were the critical negotiation, bargain cloaked as courtesy. I threw the envelope back at him and said, "No." The single word closed the first stage of the showdown and opened the second. Damien's face did not change much. Only his eyes, those steel blue planes, tightened. "You will regret this." The sentence was a threat wrapped in manners. He left the final words in the air. Outside his office, a security detail waited like a human punctuation. Their presence turned his veiled threat into a concrete hazard. The corridor's lights hummed. I felt fear press into my throat and then harden into a resolution I could act on. Instead of bargaining, I walked back to my office and filed my resignation. I printed a copy and slid it into an envelope addressed to the board. Then I took the copied drive and the ledger and taped them under the corner of my watch drawer in my desk. I placed the worn leather watch and the child's crayon drawing side by side on top, objects that mattered. The watch was the one Claire had teased me about. The drawing was that Saturday scribble of a house with 2 tall chimneys. I left them together to remind me why I was doing this. In the early morning, Maya and I moved quietly through the floor and placed encrypted warnings into staff mailboxes. Names scrolled on a small screen as we typed. Each name was a person with rent due, school pickups, and small private emergencies. When Marisol's name appeared, I felt the old scene of her box being taken again, and I hit send. The message went out. By dawn, I was home and placed the copied memo beside my child's drawing on the kitchen table. Claire watched me set the items down and then breathed out. "What now?" she asked. I took her hand and answered with a concrete plan. Legal counsel first, then press if needed, then secure transition funds from a small emergency account. I said these aloud because she needed steps, not manifestos. Claire nodded once and picked up the drawing. She smoothed the crayon line with her thumb as if it could be flattened into stability. We put the lights out together. The house settled with the sound of the refrigerator and a distant garbage truck. The final paragraph of that night was not a promise to the universe. It was the concrete beat of a decision made. I filed my resignation, copied the ledger, warned the staff, and set the evidence where it could not be lost. The resignation email waited in the outbox, scheduled for the morning when the staff would have the information before any public announcement. The last thing I did before closing the kitchen light was press my thumb into the child's drawing, then fold my worn watch over the memo, sealing the decision into objects that mattered in ways paper never could. I left the lamp off. The house kept breathing. Outside, the glass tower would begin its day with fewer people and cleaner books. Inside our kitchen, a small paper house and a leather watch held the story's proof. The night resolved into that single, precise event. I placed the copied memo beside my child's drawing and closed the kitchen light on the decision we'd already made. I held the resignation letter between my thumb and forefinger and kept the child's crayon, drawing flat with the other hand when Damien's shoes clicked against the rooftop concrete, and he said, "Ethan, are you really doing this?" Betrayal was a hard, sharp taste in my mouth the second he spoke. The red tab in the ledger had been there 3 weeks earlier, the same ledger someone turned to in that boardroom. The same roster that had been taped to my car and that Marisol had carried out in a cardboard box with a security escort in Chapter 2. I did not wait to explain. I pressed the paper flat, felt the paper fibers, and let the wind take the corner of the crayon drawing so I could pin it down with the heel of my hand. The rooftop was colder than the offices below. I could hear the city glass tone from a block away, and the building's ventilation chuffing under the parapet. I kept the resignation letter visible because I wanted him to see the page where my name sat under the word departure. The crayon drawing was my son's rocket, blue and crooked, with the words Daddy written in uneven letters. The paper smelled faintly of wax and pancakes, what my son had on Saturday morning, and that smell anchored me more than any argument. "Ethan, Damien." And his voice held its usual calculated pause. "You know what signing that does?" I looked at him. He was all suit and midnight black, the cufflink catching a distant light like a tiny coin. He had the guarded tilt to his head that made other people rethink their sentences. I had seen that tilt across boardroom tables, in shareholder meetings, when decisions moved like chess pieces. Tonight it aimed at me the way a scalpel aims at tissue. I had 2 concrete options. I could walk back inside, sign the resignation under the stipulation he offered, and keep the division intact in name while surrendering the people who worked under me to cuts and reassignment. Or I could leave the company entirely and take the fallout. The ledger and the taped roster already made the choice feel less theoretical. My hand closed on the paper. Damien stepped closer until his shadow touched my shoes. "Sign it, Ethan, and your promotion goes through. Say yes and we keep you and your family tied to the company. Say no and we walk you out with the others." Doubt tightened my jaw before I spoke. Doubt because I had watched people I trusted sit with cardboard boxes and leave without looking back. Doubt because Claire had come that night to the lobby with the small, plain handbag, and I could still hear the scrape of her fingers against the strap. I did not want to trade words for the balance of a balance sheet. I did not want to ask my son to learn the word restructure before he could tie his shoes. "Damien," I said, and my voice held less of my usual careful evenness, You can make me choose people's livelihoods as a bargaining chip. I kept my hand on the crayon drawing. You know my son's name, I said the name out loud, not to remind him, but to ground myself. He smiled that small, precise smile. Ethan, you build a company by making choices. People get relocated. That's the language of growth. His words were meant to shave the edges off the moment. Instead, they gave clarity. Anger came next, sudden and hot. My fingers tightened around the paper until the letter creased where I did not intend. My hands started to tremble, not from the cold, but from the calculation of what he asked of me. The rooftop was the first external event in that cluster of decisions. The second came when he said, "Sign this tonight or we implement the cuts at 9 am. I did not answer immediately. I folded the letter along the crease I'd made and slid it into my jacket pocket. Then I turned and left the parapet. I moved toward the stairwell and toward the elevator that led to his corner office. The rooftop had been the hook because it forced the choice into the open. The corner office would turn that choice into terms. The elevator ride up felt clinical. The lighting inside the cabin washed away the rooftop's cold and replaced it with a warm amber that flattened faces. I watched Damien from the corner of my eye. He held his fountain pen like a weight, the same pen that had signed contracts and bonuses for decades. In Chapter 3, I had found the unmarked envelope taped to my car. That evening had taught me that whoever wrote the roster could control who noticed it, and who did not. I pressed my thumb against my wedding band and felt the faint ridges worn into the metal. The corner office smelled of ozone and polished wood. Damien sat behind his desk with the ledger open between us. He pushed the resignation letter across the polished oak and placed a pen on top. "Sign it, Damien, and you keep the team saved from dissolution. You sign and I promote you to manage the consolidated operations." He tapped the roster spread open in front of him. "Refuse, and we proceed." His ultimatum was precise. It forced me to name the trade in public terms. I felt a shift, doubt to fear. Fear hovered under my collar because the roster had names I had coached, mentored, and protected. Fear because the ledger already had the red tab. "My team," I said, naming a concrete group. Marazal's team. People with mortgages. People who forget lunch boxes at home. Damien's eyes did not flinch. "Business doesn't account for lunch boxes, Ethan. It accounts for margins," as he said it. The door opened and Maya stepped into the doorway with a manila envelope clutched under her arm. The presence of another human changed the calculus in the room. Up to now this had been a private negotiation. Now it had witnesses. Maya's arrival was my third external event, and it collapsed another private seam of the plan. Ethan, Maya. And she did not fold her arms like she sometimes did when listening. Instead, she set the envelope on Damien's desk. "I brought the files you asked for." Damien looked at the envelope as if it were a minor inconvenience. He did not expect its contents. I could see the moment pass in his face. The small sharpness of his jaw betrayed some surprise. Maya slid the sealed her packet toward me and pushed it across the desk with one finger. "I didn't bring this to you to be quiet about it," she said. "I brought it because someone gave me the roster and the supporting documents 3 days ago, and I have been compiling dates, emails, and authorizations." Maya's voice was steady. The envelope held more than paper. It held the change to the narrative. She had always been pragmatic, and her pragmatic tools were files and logged conversations. She had a binder with red tabs that mirrored the ledger's tab. I remembered the boardroom where the ledger had been face up, that earlier betrayal, and the nausea that followed. Now Maya set her evidence down like a counterweight. "Maya, Damien, you can bring internal her files into a CO negotiation." "Damien," Maya replied. And she used his name as though she were holding it steady. "These are not internal rumors. These are signed authorizations and external pressure notes. They show chain of command decisions that contradict the story the board is being told." The room narrowed to the sound of the pages as she lifted the packet. She opened it at a marked page and pulled out a printed email with an external counsel's signature. I saw a list, typed names, and a note about acceptable losses. The words were concrete. They left little room for argument. Damien's face shifted from composed to controlled strain. he tensed. I felt an emotion shift happen in me from fear to a grim clarity. The evidence changed the geometry of the choice. It made capitulation less credible and exposure more possible. You know the consequences. Damien, if this goes public, the company moves into litigation. And you destroy what remains of your career here. His threat was a calculation. He was not bluffing. I thought about my son's school and the soccer cleats I could not afford to replace if my salary disappeared. I thought about Claire's quiet patience and the way she avoided eye contact when hurt. I remembered, plain as a ledger entry, the day she had sat in my kitchen and asked me if we were still a team. The memory from chapter 1 of the ledger laid bare returned to my mind. The roster had been turned, and betrayal had arrived before a word was spoken. Claire's arrival in the lobby happened without fanfare. When she walked into the building, her posture spoke of someone who had rehearsed 100 ways to ask a man not to sell their family. She did not come into the corner office immediately. Instead, she found me on the stairwell landing and spoke like a person listing facts. Ethan, Claire in the lobby, and her voice kept its quiet strength. Our son needs his father at home more than he needs a title. Her words made the stakes concrete. They were simple and sharp. Our son, his routine, the dinner table. Claire did not accuse me of cowardice. She described what was at risk. That was the fourth external event in the chapter sequence, and it forced me to reconcile the ledger as calculus with a child's bedtime. I went back into Damien's office because the negotiation required me to act. Maya stayed near the doorway with the packet visible on the credenza. We moved as a three-way chess position. The CO, the operations manager, her head revealing evidence. The room was full of small sounds, the rustle of pages, Damien's pen tapping once on the desk, the faint hum of the building slate, night systems. "What do you want me to do, Maya?" I asked. The question was both practical and a plea. Copy the roster. Maya, get proof of the external authorizations. Put it somewhere safe, then decide. Her plan was precise. It required action and timing. The next event was the midnight data grab in the server room. We moved fast because that movement forced a new framing. Evidence in hand versus evidence under lock and key. The server room smelled of warm metal and disinfectant. The lights hummed in a bluish cast. An IT technician leaned over a rack and clicked through a login screen, hand steady. I stood by the console, my fingers pressed to the keyboard while Maya worked the copy process. My heart thudded like a stolen thing. The copying required several concrete steps. Maya handed me a thumb drive. I inserted it. The progress bar crawled. I watched folder names populate the drive. Roster final, Arth notes, external pressure. The server room was a controlled space. Every second there felt both measured and urgent. My fingers tapped the pen in my pocket until the cursor reached the end of the copy. We had the files. The next event was security noticing movement on the cameras and sending a team to the corridor. The sound of heavy boots in the building's service hall made us look up. We moved out before they arrived and took the glass corridor route toward the boardroom. The corridor was a stage with a clean floor, glass walls, and a view of the boardroom beyond. Damien intercepted us there, and the interception was the chapter's climax. Security flanked him, the cleanness of the corridor amplifying every voice. He stood with his hand on the glass frame like he was keeping the outside from spilling in. Ethan, Damien. And now he used my name in a cadence meant to pin me. Either you hand over those files, sign the roll call, or I remove you from this building myself. That was the glass corridor confrontation. The climax beat, the corridor reflected faces, the hum of the building felt like a witness. I felt the room tilt toward inevitability. I could see Claire's face behind the glass gallery. She had not stayed in the lobby for a simple appeal. She had come to watch. Her presence mattered in a way that made the next exchange public rather than private. "Damien, give me 2 minutes," I said, and I used his name like a leverage point. I turned to Maya. "Do we have everything?" Maya nodded once and pushed the thumb drive into my palm. Her jaw worked like a person holding steady through a pressure. "Ethan, Damien," louder now, and he used the word that arranged the room. "Hand it over." We had rapid lines of dialogue then, a short, fast exchange that cut through the corridor's glass. It was an argument in miniature. Damien, I said, you can ask me to sell people. Ethan, Damien replied, this is not personal. Maya, I said, looking at her, what if we put this somewhere neutral? We file it with council and the board if they won T-Act. Maya, you would risk the company's market position. Damien countered, I'd risk exposing the truth. I said. Security shifted a step. One officer's hand hovered near a radio. The corridor felt smaller. I saw Claire's mouth form a single word, Ethan, like a measurement. Then I did something that ended the private calculus. I took the thumb drive and pressed it into Damien's open palm. Don't sign anything tonight, I said. Don't implement the cuts at 9 am. Put it in front of the board with the evidence, or we take it outside. There was silence for less than a beat, and then a sound like a dry intake. Damien's face did not break into fury. It went flat into assessment. He looked at the drive, then at my face, then at the glass-walled boardroom where members were beginning to stand and look. I had forced a public choice. Either hand over authority to the board or make the company fight to conceal what it had done. Damien did not grab the drive. He closed his hand around it like a man considering a coin. You realize what this does to you, Ethan? He asked. I realize what your methods did to Marisol, I said. I realize what you did when you let that envelope dictate people's lives. I said the name because it was a concrete memory from Chapter 2. The security escort and the cardboard box. Naming her work put weight behind my words. Damien lifted his eyes. For a moment they were not entirely cold. You have a family, he said. You think I done to know that? Think carefully. I thought of the child's crooked rocket and the pancake's smell. Of Claire's hands folded in her lap the night she asked if we were still a team. The emotion shift settled into resolve. I had moved from betrayal through doubt, fear, clarity, and into a forced steadiness that felt practical rather than heroic. The next event unspooled fast. The boardroom doors opened and several members stepped into the corridor. Rumors travel faster than assurances. Phones came out. People who had been on the other side of the ledger began to look like witnesses. Claire moved from the gallery to the front, and her presence changed the room's scale. One board member said, "What is happening here?" Another murmured that her had flagged anomalies. Damien's composed control loosened as alliances shifted in real time. Some faces on the board looked away from him. Others considered the drive in his hand as a bargaining piece. When the board asked to see the documents publicly, Damien hesitated. His authority had depended on a certain opacity. The evidence made that opacity dangerous. He set the thumb drive on the corridor's slow ledge and said, "We'll bring this to a closed hearing." Maya refused the private option. "No," she said. "If it's closed, the same people who signed the roster control the narrative. We file this with counsel and an independent auditor." A direct conversation broke out among the board members. It was not a tidy exchange, it was several short lines. Name after name rose. Some defended the company, some hard questions about process. The room was full of voices. My role shifted from negotiator to witness to participant. Claire stepped forward and said something that unstitched the last thread of private calculation. "This is about people," she said, and her voice was plain and factual. "This is about lunches forgotten and soccer games missed. If the company wants loyalty, it can sell our neighbors." She looked at me. "Ethan, are you with me?" I looked the thumb drive, then at Damien, then at Claire. The decision had a simple end. Expose the ledger, accept whatever fallout, and preserve the work of people I had led. Or sign and keep my role at the cost of others. I did not make a speech. I walked to the drive and pushed it, deliberately, into the hands of an independent board director who had come forward and said he would call counsel. "I want an independent audit and a public review," I said. "No private sign-offs. No overnight cuts." The corridor filled with short lines of negotiation after that, legal counsel names, the timeline for an audit, the question of market reaction. Damien's control slid. He made a choice then, in front of everyone. He did not try to conceal the evidence. Instead, he agreed to a closed hearing the next day with counsel present. It was an attempt to contain the damage while appearing to cooperate. but the momentum had shifted. The filing placed an institutional hand between him and the ledger's secrecy. It was not a complete victory. The boardroom fallout came slow and messy. Executives took positions, alliances reformed. Some managers who had stayed quiet before now found their voice. The rumor spread past the glass. Claire watched the ripple with quiet fatigue etched into the corners of her mouth. She did not cheer, she placed both hands over her son's drawing and did not let go. That small gesture was an external event that anchored the room back to the moral center of the conflict. When the day ended, I did not go back to Damien's office. I walked home because the final beat belonged not to the company but to the life I'd been trying to save. At dawn I placed my worn leather watch next to the crooked blue rocket on the kitchen table. The watch had marks on the leather from years of wear. The buckle had a small scratch that Claire had noticed once and never mentioned again. My son padded in with pajamas half on and a stubborn curl in his hair. He climbed onto a chair and looked at the drawing and then at the watch. He reached out and touched the watch, as if it were an offering. "Daddy," he said, naming me the concrete thing I was in his world. I put my hand over his. "I'm here," I said. He did not ask about the company or the board. He for cereal and if we could go to the park later. Claire cut slices of toast and poured orange juice. We moved through these domestic acts with the slow steadiness of people who had been through a storm but still made room for breakfast. The final paragraphs of this chapter must end on a concrete situational beat. I did not close with a promise or a sweeping claim. I closed with an action that tied the domestic to the corporate. As we were finishing, the building's concierge called my phone with a message. A lawyer for the independent director wanted to schedule a meeting at 10 a.m. I put the call on speaker so Claire could hear. "They want to meet you at 10, the concierge said. The meeting was a new external event and a clear continuation of the day's decisions. I looked down at the watch, then at the drawing, then at my son. 10 a.m. is fine, I said. I stood, picked up the watch and slipped it onto my wrist. My hand trembled only once, then steadied. My son reached for my hand and squeezed. Claire's fingers found mine across the table. The sound of the kettle boiling made a small domestic punctuation. I left the kitchen with the watch on my wrist, and the crayon rocket slipped into my jacket pocket, folded along the same crease ID made on the rooftop. I stepped out the front door and felt the morning like a weight both uncertain and resolute. The legal meeting would begin another set of choices. The boardroom would continue to shift and rearrange power. But the last concrete beat in this chapter, the sound of my son's small footstep as he ran after me to the door, and the way his hand grabbed the leather strap of my watch, is where I end. His grip was solid. It pulled me back from the ledger's edges and toward the daily work of being present. The watch sat warm from my wrist. The rocket kept a smudge of blue wax where my thumb had held it. The door closed behind us, and his small voice said, "Daddy, race you to the car," and I took his hand and ran.